Okay, we're back for part two, and unfortunately, my screen is still frozen. Sorry about that. But the slides should still work, so we'll jump right in. Let's see. I hope that your day is going well and that you're able to show yourself some gentleness today. Sending good vibes as we all go through. Again, this is January 31st, 2026 that I'm filming this, and I know a lot of us feel like the last month has felt like 10 years because of the trauma that the regime has been inflicting on this country that we live in. If you're watching this from the United States, if you know, you know. Um, but yeah, we are currently living under a wannabe dictator who is wreaking havoc, and that's why we're here today. We are talking about collective trauma. Quick, a couple things. If you didn't get to see part one, definitely go watch that because part two will not make sense if you haven't watched part one yet. Also, a couple of housekeeping items. Again, if you have anything shitty to say in the comments, you'll be immediately deleted and blocked. Just don't do it. This space is really for people who are looking for some trauma healing tips. So that's who we're here to support today, and hopefully that's you. And if not, then go away. So that's what we're doing. Not to be so blunt and brutal, but sometimes you got to set a hard line and a hard boundary, and we have to do that today. So, okay, so part two. Last time we left off on the framework draws from trauma informed design and nervous system science. Again, this is for public benefit. I'm not pitching anything here. We're just talking about collective healing, and I'm sharing some resources under a special tab for that. Okay, so step one, and again, these are not in order. This is just separate concepts that go into healing environments. So, some things we can do for grounding environments. This is where we get to the physical environment and how we can create some predictability, reduce sensory overload, and we can use specific tools like light, airflow, texture, and layout intentionally to be conducive to healing support. Include nature where possible and practical, and also where you don't have to worry about allergies. Some people have sensitivities we have to be mindful of, and we want to honor that too. And designing spaces that invite pause rather than urgency. I think I've said this in one of my other presentations, but I'll just say it again. There's a reason why people don't host yoga classes on highway overpasses. It's just not conducive to healing and mindfulness and yoga. It's just not, right? So, as much as we love the power of um, our bodies and our minds to be able to direct our behaviors, and I'm a big fan of meditation. You've probably heard me talk extensively about people like Dr. Joe Dispenza, whose work I highly appreciate and respect. That being said, there is absolutely something to creating a healing environment that is conducive to the type of work people want to do, whether it's meditation or yoga or any kind of mindfulness or healing activity. Those things are key. So, how do we begin to reduce sensory overload and increase predictability and use light, et cetera, to be able to create these kind of environments? Well, I'll give you a handful of things to start with because there's a lot that goes into that. But you can start with a few things, and those few things can help immensely within seconds. So we'll start there. Um, Reducing sensory overload, that can be as simple as making a corner in your environment that just doesn't have a lot of stuff in it, and that the stuff that it does have is conducive to your healing. It might be that you have an altar if you're into that. It might be that you just have a quiet space with a curtain or some kind of screen or something like that that is minimalistic. And that, again, where there are items, they are conducive to your healing. Maybe it's an altar with sound bowls, maybe it's um, chimes, it might be a nature photo, something that induces visual calm. And by the way, biomimicry has been shown to actually decrease blood pressure in individuals. There's a lot of science behind biomimicry. And so if you can bring that in as well, awesome. be mindful of any allergies you or your other fellow occupants might have, but otherwise, do what feels right there. And certainly reach out if you have questions about that. Predictability and visual calm. Light's a huge one. Light is such a humongous topic on its own. What I will say that will help is paying attention to the focus of the light, whether it's focus or diffuse, paying attention to the direction of the light, paying attention to how bright or dim the light is, and paying attention to the color of the light. Those are four main things you want to focus on when you're thinking about light. So things that are more helpful with light and space are diffuse versus really focused lighting. In healing spaces, lower light. Certainly, if you've got dimmers, turning those down way low can be really helpful, while keeping them high enough that the space is still safe to walk around in, because you want to be able to see without, tripping on anything. No safety hazards, please. The color of the light can be really effective when it comes to, well, depending on what other colors you have in your environment. But the color of the light is something to pay attention to, and you may want to kind of consider the existing colors you have and making sure something isn't too cool or too warm for whatever you have going on in there. Warmer light tends to be better in spaces like this, but not if it's going to wash out visually the items you have in the space. So that one's a little bit more complicated, but it's something you probably want to review in person if you have the right bulbs and whatnot. So you have talks about diffuseness, and direction. If the light is shining directly in your face, that's not exactly relaxing. How many times have you been on the road and you're driving at night and someone has their high beams on and it just feels like an assault on your system, right? Let's not do that, right? Let's make the light not be like blaring directly in your face if you can avoid it. So a few things to consider. Again, that one with color is a little bit nuanced. So if you have questions about that, let me know. I'm happy to answer it. But again, consider the items you already have in your space. The easiest thing to do there might be to, gosh, how do I want to word this? I'll put something in the comments that will help with this. But that one's a little bit more nuanced. So just pay attention to how that feels in your individual space and consider that color can impact your outcome. Including nature. Yeah, we talked about that. Biomimicry, photos. Okay, so specific types of nature, all kinds of nature has been shown to have positive benefits, even when it's just visual and not literal, in your space, although being in literal nature has shown to be incredibly effective with things like test performance, all kinds of stuff. But when it comes to biomimicry, like visuals, just like photos of stuff, photos of like a big lake or an ocean or something like that can be really relaxing. But again, consider, individual experiences. That imagery might be super relaxing for like the majority of people. But if you're someone who's experienced trauma around water, that might not be your go-to image, and that's okay. Pay attention again to what you want and what you have in your space, and go from there. So, okay. So now that we've talked a little bit about the physical environment, what we can do there, and again, I'll include a resource to selecting a light color in the comments for this YouTube video. So pay attention for that. Okay. Step 2, emotional permission. Normalizing fear, grief, anger, and confusion, and not the harm taking place. And that is such a easier said than done thing to do, because it's easier, I think, for many of us to look at what's going on and say, oh, wow, this is just like happening now. This is what, reality now? Let's never make that the reality. Let's instead normalize the response to the incredibly harmful, incredibly not okay stuff taking place. Making a space for expression without debating or fixing. Right? Just saying what I'm feeling is right and it's okay. And just staying with that mentality. Naming harm clearly without sensationalizing it, right? So we're not trying to exacerbate the fear. We're not trying to elevate or escalate the fear. We just want to give it space to exist. There's a really good framework by Elizabeth Gilbert, if you're familiar, in her book Big Magic, which I'm been a huge fan of for years. But she talks about in this book, and I really resonate with this, the idea of, allowing like if you're driving a car, allowing fear to exist in the car, because that's a reality for all human beings. It's wired into us, but to not let it have a front seat, to put it in the back seat, to not let it have the wheel, to not let it have your agency, but instead giving it a space without giving it power. So I really resonated with that analogy, and I definitely recommend that book. It's really good if you haven't read it already. Safety comes from being allowed to be honest. Absolutely. So if you can validate yourself, that's a huge step in healing from trauma and moving into something different. Step 3, cyclical regulation. Collective trauma requires cycles and strategic rest, not constant output. So in this capitalistic society where we're constantly pushed and driven to just output, productivity, is prioritized over so many other things that are really important. And especially in the United States, we really we do a terrible job of taking care of our people with this mentality. Hustle culture, so toxic. Practices that can help combat this: breath and somatic resets, mindful movement, and strategic rest. Again, rest is a strategy because rest is baseline, but also when you have quality and consistent rest, you do better. You do better at life. You're automatically more productive. You're automatically more effective. So that's key too. Ritual and rhythm, which contribute to that feeling of predictability. We talked about predictability in space a few slides ago, and creating a sense of predictability in life is key too. It really allows our nervous systems to rest a little bit more. Healing accelerates when rest is seen as necessary and practiced consistently. Again, it's not an indulgence, and our society is fucking crazy for suggesting it is. I'm just going to say it. Step 4, communal co-creation. Helplessness can deepen trauma and create kind of a downward spiral. So there are some of us who really feel like we need to be in community, and we need to be have a social aspects of our lives to heal. And some of us feel like when we're not in community, when we're kind of isolated in these negative feelings, that it can just contribute to a downward spiral. So sometimes for some of us, it is necessary to be seeking communal co-creation, community co-regulation and healing. But again, because so much harm has been created in groups. I mean, look at cults, for example. Cults are a perfect example of people who've been traumatized, who are seeking additional healing, and talk about falling in with the wrong crowd, right? Selective participation restores agency. And we don't need to be perfectly healed, to make decisions, but we do need to have some sort of awareness and healing and, practice going on in the background to be able to help us make good decisions about where we selectively participate in community, to, again, intentionally restore agency and co-regulate. In that way, we can build, tend, and solve things together. Shared responsibility strengthens collective regulation. Community, when approached carefully, can be an awesome nervous system intervention. And again, some caveats. And again, I've already said this in the previous video, and I've said it like throughout these videos. I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. This is not medical advice. These are simply some practices that I have been trained in over the years and have found extremely helpful, and also paired with my own personal experience. When you have already experienced a lot of trauma in group environments, whatever those group environments may be, it can be incredibly difficult to want to gravitate towards communities for healing once again. So some caveats, again, with group healing. We want to treat this as selectively as possible. We want to keep in mind our come from. So if we're coming from a lot of trauma, whether it's group related or individual or relational, etc., then we want to walk into any kind of community potential healing situation with open eyes, and keep in mind that we're still on our path, our progress. We're not always going to pick perfectly, right? Hopefully we're able to tap into our intuition and to have an awareness around where we've been and where we're going, and we can make healthy decisions from that place that elevate us instead of drain us and hurt us more. Okay. So step 5, narrative repair. This is huge. Trauma fractures meaning and it steals agency. Whether we're talking about the agency of individuals or groups. Storytelling, both individually and collectively, helps to rebuild that narrative. Art, music, ritual, and shared reflection counter despair. They transmute pain into beauty. And also, I will add, where a dominating, colonistic, harmful, toxic, abusive group is trying to change a narrative to reflect how their egos want to see things versus how they actually are, it's incredibly helpful, not just for healing, but for documentation purposes, to accurately document narratives. As someone who once majored in art history and has learned a lot of history throughout, oh gosh, I had such a good education. I'm so grateful for that growing up. College, master's degrees, and just personal study ever since. I can't say how important it is for accurate historical reflection and continued storytelling, especially when harmful narratives are doubled down on. It just is so important. So that art, that music, that ritual, that storytelling, and that documentation, that shared reflection counter despair, they counter misinformation, and they transmute pain into beauty. It's also in alignment with nature. If you think about how nature works, right? We think about how things grow and how, you might plant a seed and then you have to fertilize it. Well, what is fertilizer? Fertilizer is usually shit, or it's usually the byproducts of things that maybe don't smell so pleasant, and we don't always hold in the highest regard as far as how we experience them because they, just kind of gross, right? But we need that grossness. We don't need the grossness, but we take the grossness of that and its natural ability to help plants grow, right? So we can't kind of get away that shit exists, but we can use it to help us grow things. I hope that's a helpful analogy. But yeah, I tend to think of it that way. I'm like, oh, we're turning shit into, some people might say we're turning shit into gold. I might say we're turning shit into life. We're turning shit into life and growth, and harnessing whatever we can there from what exists, right? Rather than just, throwing it somewhere where it's not going to be useful. Let's take it and place it somewhere where we can actually grow and heal and blossom. Some examples of how this might find us in society. There's all kinds of examples that have happened over so many generations and times. I'm thinking of a few here that are more recent, but I would love to hear, who else has inspired you recently. Mr. Rogers has always been a fan of mine. Actually, I've always been a fan of Mr. Rogers. I noticed that Lady Gaga recently came out with a "Won't You Be My Neighbor" track, and I found that really inspiring and lovely. I also know that Macklemore has been a very outspoken critic of this regime and what's happened in Gaza, and I really appreciate his music. I loved Ice Cube and his Arrest the President track. Who else? My God, there's so many. But just, a few that come to mind, right? Of how we can take this terrible garbage that's happening right now and turn it into art that inspires and heals and validates what we're experiencing. But hey, would love to. And this is a perfect opportunity. Talk about community and practice. This is a perfect opportunity to share some of your favorites in the comments. Who are some of your favorite artists that have taken shit and turned it into life and growth and healing? I would love to hear from you on that. I'm sure we all have our own faves there. So truth telling matters without fear-based amplification. Again, we're not trying to give that fear power. We are trying to give it space, just enough space, but not too much. So again, think selective, mindful, empowered vulnerability. We do heal by reshaping the stories we carry together, by acknowledging events and writing a new and better story. Okay, practical tools for an individual. Setting boundaries around news and social media. I've talked about this at length in some of my other programs. Yeah, setting boundaries on news and social media. Those are their own environments, right? Social media, the internet, the TV, whatever you want to call it, those are their own like portals and environments. And so we got to curate those as well. And I think many of us are kind of on default there. And I'm guilty of it sometimes too, where I kind of let it run amok. But especially right now, as we're being pulled into so much atrocity happening, it's especially important to double down on boundaries, whether that's the amount of time you spend or the creators that you select to pay attention to. Whatever it might be, it's healthy to set some boundaries around how you experience news, internet, TV, social media, and that's its own environment. You can also create a personal sanctuary corner in your space. We talked a little bit about that. It might look like an altar. It might look like just a space where you have kind of curated minimalism and some healing tools. It might be journalizing, journal or externalizing fear rather than looping it in your head, getting it out of your body and onto paper. Maybe it's getting it out of your body through dance, other kinds of art forms, so many types of art forms to transmute and process grief, visual, written, performing arts, etc. However you can get this out of your body and into artistic form, go for it. Go for it. I never feel bad after a dance session. I never feel bad after a journaling session or a visual art session where I'm processing something, or even when I'm not processing something and I'm just kind of having like a light time about it. Notice as you practice these kinds of things, what comes up for you, how you feel before and after. And if you, feel like sharing that with me or in the comments, again, this is all about collective support and healing. And hey, if we want to do that in practice, then let's do that. Let us know. Protect sleep and recovery, sleep hygiene, being the fierce protectress of that, or protector. I know most of my audience is like women, and my clientele tends to be the women, gays, and theys. But if you're male, sorry, I probably should have written that here. Protector or protectress or protector of your sleep, hygiene, and fierce boundaries around that. So key. Oh my goodness. Not just how much sleep you're getting, but the quality too. Because right now there's some wild stuff happening, and even if we're sleeping, we could be experiencing teeth grinding, tension in the system, right? So getting that tension to release before sleep can be incredibly helpful when you do that. Relational practical tools, practicing co-regulation and conversation can be really helpful. Again, this is not medical advice. I'm not a doctor, not a therapist. These are some things that I have found to be helpful as a trauma-informed designer and also coach and personal experience and practice and coaching as well. Listening without correcting, validation and support. Again, listening to someone without kind of trying to fix something or project your own reality onto it can be incredibly validating. Naming capacity and limits, for example, boundaries around the amount of time you might have for a topic, to again give it space without giving it power. Repairing conflict early and gently to avoid relationship spiraling can be so key. Staying connected even when opinions differ, unless something's a deal breaker, such as a belief of someone that causes harm, right? So we all have our own different perspectives. We're not going to agree on everything. And so it's important to stay connected with those that we care about and lean on. And sometimes it's necessary to move on from a relationship if there are belief systems that are harmful. So keep an eye on that. But again, we talk about community and relational healing. It can be so easy to choose isolation, but we often do really benefit from that relational healing when it's aligned. Practical tools, community and space, trauma-informed meetings and gatherings. Oh gosh, I went to a really good one last month. Exactly last month, a month ago. It was a New Year's event and it was wonderful. There was a sound bath, there was community healing Reiki, there was like healthy, delicious food, bonfires. It was a really beautiful event that was hosted by a friend and colleague, and it was wonderful. So trauma-informed meetings and gatherings can be really supportive, especially again with that right group of people that is really mindful and moving in the same direction as you. Calm zones at events where people can kind of choose to step out and away from the energies of a group if they need a break to just kind of regulate or take a moment. Clear expectations and transitions. Communication and clarity is so key to being able to navigate these events and groups. Shared creative and restorative rituals. Again, I shared a few that I personally appreciated. Environments that signal safety and welcome. And we'll talk about belonging. Yeah. Reduce reactivity. So what collective healing looks like: reduce reactivity, increase curiosity and collaboration. And that really looks like the positive mirroring, the reflection and expansion on ideas, right? We're building on ideas with one another. Some of the best collective healing and transformation and growth related work that I've been a part of is where people, like, you have an idea about something you want to achieve in life, and it's like a mastermind where people are like, oh, that's great, but like you can add this would be like even better. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And all of a sudden you're like, your idea, which you thought was like already pretty cool, it has like all these other really awesome things added to it. You're like, oh, I never thought about that. That's a really great idea. Let me like loop that into my original thing. And it's just this positive build. So when you're with the right group, curiosity, collaboration can really be a beautiful mirroring, expansion, and build on of already existing like great ideas. It can also look like the return of creativity and humor. Using humor to move through a traumatic events can be so key. And some people call that dark humor or whatever. I think it's like whatever helps you move through a situation, and forget anyone who judges that, right? As long as we're being sensitive to other people, what we find funny is our business. And if you need humor to get through a really challenging time in your life, then go for it. There's so many comedians that I believe, and I just adore them and thank them so much, that help us through trauma, using humor and using key moments to highlight harmful activities, but then finding a moment of laughter in that, which is so healing. It also looks like a stronger sense of belonging. Studies have shown that belonging ranks as a high priority in individuals, and belonging is really validation scaled, right? Validation amongst individuals and relationally is one thing that's beautiful on its own. Validation and belonging in a group is really validation scaled. So And that's a really high priority for individuals. And I believe that belonging is the feeling of belonging is a seed of healing in community. I really, really do. Greater tolerance for complexity, ability and inspiration to imagine the future again. When someone is stuck, or when people or groups are stuck in trauma, the ability and inspiration to imagine a future can be really hard to do. Be really hard to do. So if we're able to do that amongst all of this batshit stuff going on, then good for us, because that's extremely powerful. It says, I will do and I will be this despite what you're doing. I will do and I will be this despite, the trauma, the abuse, the whatever. The ultimate like overcoming. That is amazing. Okay. In closing, I would offer an invitation. This is not a pitch. Take what supports you, leave the rest. Share what helps with others. Again, whether you want to email me, info@kdtt.com, and share something that personally helped you anonymously, go right ahead. If you want to comment on the video with stuff that helps, like we talked about, some artists that you've found inspirational, some practices without pitching any creators, because we're not doing any pitching. I'm not doing pitching here, and I'm telling you no pitching here. We're not doing that. This is a collective resource thing. Whatever else may be useful that you want to add to this conversation that's helped you personally from a practice standpoint, and not a pitch standpoint. Collective trauma is real. So is collective repair. Again, when done carefully, mindfully, selectively. And this is community-based and or individual-based. Some people will choose to never or hardly ever engage in community-based healing activities, and that's okay too. Sometimes too much trauma has happened within group to where certain individuals will never find themselves in that kind of healing environment, and that's okay. Trust what you know about yourself and what you have capacity for. So when the world hurts, care and joy are acts of resistance. Healing the way is slow, relational, and profoundly human work, and it matters. And I want to close with this quote, because I believe I mentioned this in part 1 of this presentation and at the very beginning. So I thought this is a beautiful loop back. Our grief for the world is our love for the world. And I do believe that if you are experiencing trauma from what's going on right now, you care. And that's important, that we love this planet that we're on, that we love the people on it and the communities, and we're seeing what's happening and we're not okay with it, obviously. And the trauma that comes from that is terrible. It's not okay. And as we also move through that, I think one important reflection point is that this is reflective of our love. Our grief for what's happening right now and what has been happening over generations is our love for the world. So never stop caring, never stop loving. And with that, I will wrap. I'm sorry my video didn't work again. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's happening with my computer. That's happened actually a few times, so I should probably look into it. But I do appreciate you being here today. I appreciate everything that we're all doing in our communities to be a benefit, to be of support, and just keep moving forward and being the awesome person you are. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.